The tension in the room was thick enough to cut with a knife. It wasn't a film set, but it might as well have been. Cameras were rolling, flashes bursting, and the nation was watching as Michelle Obama walked into the gala hall, where Denzel Washington was being honored for his lifetime of achievement. The former First Lady's expression was calm, but her presence carried a storm. Denzel stood tall, that familiar poise in his eyes, but even he couldn't anticipate what was about to unfold. Michelle approached the podium, her voice steady, layered with disappointment and restrained fire. "There are moments," she said, "when silence becomes complicity, and I've seen people I respect stay silent when truth demanded their voice." The audience froze. They knew exactly who she was talking about. Denzel's name echoed in whispers across the room. The man himself, seated near the front, adjusted his tie and looked up. Cameras zoomed in. Every movement was now part of history in the making. Michelle continued, "When influence meets injustice, neutrality isn't strength, it's surrender." Gasps rippled through the crowd. For years, Michelle had admired Denzel's quiet dignity, his refusal to play Hollywood's political games. But after his recent comments downplaying racial unrest, she felt betrayed. It wasn't about fame. It was about responsibility. Denzel rose slowly, applause stuttering around him as he prepared to respond. The world held its breath. In that instant, every American watching knew this wasn't just a celebrity spat. It was a collision between power, morality, and the truth America keeps trying to bury. The air felt electric, the kind of tension that makes even the most confident people shift in their seats. Cameras panned across the room as Denzel Washington stood, his tall frame commanding quiet respect. The applause that followed wasn't the kind that celebrates. It was cautious, uncertain, almost fearful. Everyone knew what was coming next would ripple far beyond that room. Denzel reached for the microphone, his voice low, measured, and steady like thunder before a storm. "Mrs. Obama," he began, pausing just long enough for the silence to deepen. "I have nothing but respect for you, for your words, for your heart. But respect doesn't mean obedience, and silence doesn't always mean surrender." The crowd murmured, unsure whether to applaud or hold their breath. He continued, each word deliberate, sharp as glass. "You talk about complicity, but sometimes speaking too soon, too loud, without listening, that's how truth gets lost. I wasn't silent because I didn't care. I was silent because I was watching, because I was listening, because real change doesn't come from outrage. It comes from understanding what's behind it." Michelle watched him closely, her eyes narrowing slightly, not in anger, but in intrigue. This wasn't a man who folded under pressure. This was Denzel Washington, calm, strategic, and unflinchingly honest. The audience erupted into whispers again. Some saw wisdom in his words. Others saw deflection. Reporters in the back began typing furiously. This was front-page material. Then Denzel looked directly into the camera, his tone tightening. "We all want justice. But if we start tearing down those who could stand beside us, we'll end up alone in the fight." The room was silent. The storm hadn't ended. It had just changed direction. And for the first time, Michelle's expression softened. She realized this wasn't a clash of egos. It was a collision of two truths, both born from pain, both necessary. By the next morning, every news outlet in America had the same footage looping on repeat. Michelle Obama, standing firm, her voice echoing across the room, and Denzel Washington, unshaken, delivering words that burned through the silence. The confrontation wasn't just trending, it was consuming the nation. Hashtags like hashtag Denzel versus Michelle and hashtag Truth in Silence flooded every social media feed. Cable news anchors dissected every word like it was a presidential debate. "Did Michelle Obama go too far?" asked one host. "Or did Denzel finally say what America needed to hear?" countered another. Talk shows lit up, politicians weighed in, and even late-night comedians couldn't resist turning it into their opening joke. But beneath the noise, something real was happening. People were taking sides, not just politically, but morally. One half of the country stood with Michelle, calling for action, accountability, and courage in the face of injustice. The other half defended Denzel, praising his calm, his restraint, his refusal to be weaponized by a media machine that thrived on outrage. Clips of Denzel's speech went viral. "Silence isn't surrender. It's patience," he had said, and that line alone became a cultural flashpoint. T-shirts, TikToks, and protest signs appeared overnight with those words printed in bold. Meanwhile, Michelle's quote, "Neutrality is surrender," became its own rallying cry. College students painted it across campus walls. Activists shouted it in marches. The two messages collided online like fire and gasoline. For the first time in years, America wasn't arguing about politics. It was arguing about principle. And both Michelle and Denzel, unwillingly, had become symbols in a battle they never meant to start. Behind closed doors, Denzel's phone was buzzing nonstop. Agents, friends, journalists, all asking the same question. Are you going to respond again? He hadn't decided yet. But one thing was certain. If he did, the next words he spoke could change everything. When the cameras turned off and the lights dimmed, Denzel sat alone in his Los Angeles home, the city's glow spilling through the window like an interrogation lamp. The phone kept vibrating. Statements from studios, invitations from talk shows, even a message from a well-known senator asking him to clarify his words. But Denzel didn't answer any of them. He stared at the news replaying on his muted TV, Michelle's sharp gaze, his own measured tone, and finally sighed. People thought his silence was pride. It wasn't. It was exhaustion. He had seen too many movements die under the weight of noise. People shouting louder than they listened, demanding loyalty over truth. Denzel remembered the 1990s, when he spoke against Hollywood's hypocrisy about race and was quietly blacklisted from several roles. He remembered how that silence saved his career, not because it was weakness, but because it was strategy. Now, decades later, that same silence had made him the center of a moral war he never wanted. In a private conversation with a friend that leaked days later, Denzel reportedly said, "You can't preach about justice if you're chasing applause." The quote went viral, sparking another firestorm. Some called him wise, others called him arrogant. Meanwhile, Michelle's team released a statement that seemed both diplomatic and challenging. Mrs. Obama believes every voice matters, especially those who've earned the privilege of being heard. The tone was unmistakable. Behind the headlines, Denzel's wife, Pauletta, urged him to stay calm. "They're trying to pull you into the mud," she said softly. "Don't let them." He nodded, but deep down he knew something had shifted. This wasn't just about words anymore. It was about power, about who got to define morality in a country that worshipped celebrity and punished conviction. And as Denzel looked at his reflection in the dark window, one thought echoed in his mind. What if she's right? The tension that had simmered for days finally boiled over when Michelle Obama sat down for an exclusive primetime interview. The host, known for her calm but cutting style, didn't waste time. "Michelle," she began, leaning forward, "you've seen Denzel's remarks. Some say this feud represents the division within America itself. What do you say to that?" Michelle smiled, the kind of smile that precedes a storm. "Feud," she repeated slowly. "This isn't a feud. This is a reckoning." The studio fell silent. The former First Lady continued, her tone deliberate and fiery. "I respect Denzel. I truly do. But when people with influence choose silence over truth, that silence speaks louder than any speech. The America I know doesn't need quiet observers. It needs fighters." Her words hit the airwaves like a missile. Within minutes, clips of the interview were everywhere. Hashtag Reckoning Speech began trending, followed by hashtag Denzel Responds. Political commentators tore into every phrase. Some said Michelle was calling out the entire entertainment industry. Others claimed she was baiting Denzel, daring him to speak again. Across town, Denzel watched the broadcast from his study. He didn't move, didn't flinch, but behind his calm expression, a storm was brewing. He understood exactly what Michelle was doing. This wasn't about ego. This was about defining who held moral authority in a fractured America. His phone rang again, this time It was a journalist from a major network offering him a live rebuttal slot the next night. "The world wants to hear your truth," the producer said. Denzel hesitated. He could stay silent and let the storm pass, or step into it and let the world see his fire. He turned off the TV and whispered to himself, "You wanted fighters, Michelle? Now you've got one." The next morning, headlines screamed across every front page. Denzel Washington to respond live. The showdown begins. It was a night unlike any other. Every major network had cleared its primetime slot. Across the country, millions of Americans sat glued to their screens, waiting. The cheering on the bottom of the screen read simply, "Denzel Washington speaks live." Inside the studio, the air was electric. You could feel it, the tension, the weight of expectation, the sense that whatever happened tonight would ripple across politics, Hollywood, and every kitchen table conversation in America. When Denzel finally walked onto the stage, the audience erupted in applause. But he didn't smile. He stood tall, dressed in black, his face calm yet resolute. The host greeted him, but Denzel's eyes were fixed on the camera, on the nation itself. "Mr. Washington," the interviewer began cautiously, "you've been accused of staying silent in the face of moral crisis." Michelle Obama said, "This is a time for fighters, not observers." "How do you respond?" Denzel leaned forward, voice steady as stone. "I've spent 40 years watching this country confuse shouting with courage," he said. "Everyone wants to be loud. No one wants to be right." The crowd murmured. The host tried to interject, but Denzel kept going, his tone sharpening with each word. "If speaking truth makes me your enemy, then maybe your truth was never real. I've seen corruption wear a suit and call itself leadership. I've seen injustice hide behind applause. And I'm done pretending silence means consent." The studio went silent. Not a cough, not a whisper. Cameras zoomed in on his eyes. He wasn't performing. He was testifying. Then came the moment that made history. "I respect Michelle Obama," Denzel said. "But this isn't about respect. This is about reality. Power doesn't belong to politicians or actors. It belongs to the people watching right now. And if you're waiting for permission to speak, you already lost your voice." The room exploded in gasps and applause. Twitter melted down. Hashtags like hashtag Denzel Unleashed and hashtag Voice of the People dominated global trends within minutes. As the broadcast ended, the host whispered, almost in awe, "You may have just changed the game." Denzel looked straight into the lens one last time and said, "No, I just reminded them it was theirs to change." By morning, Denzel's words had spread like wildfire. Every news outlet was replaying the clip of him saying, "Power doesn't belong to politicians or actors. It belongs to the people." It wasn't just a statement anymore. It was a declaration. But inside Mar-a-Lago, the mood was far from admiration. Trump had been watching the broadcast, jaw clenched, fingers tapping impatiently on the table. His advisors hovered nervously as the former president's phone buzzed nonstop. Donors, campaign aides, and even Republican senators texting in panic. "He just made you look weak, sir," one of them finally said. That was the spark. Within hours, Trump stormed onto Truth Social, posting in all caps, "Denzel Washington is a Hollywood hypocrite. Another elitist who thinks he can lecture the American people. Weak, fake, and desperate." The post went viral instantly. Conservative commentators echoed Trump's rage, branding Denzel as a traitor to his roots. Meanwhile, liberal circles rallied behind him, hailing his speech as a modern-day call for justice. America had split down the middle once again. Later that night, Trump appeared at a rally in Texas, the crowd roaring as he took the stage. "This guy, Denzel Washington," he said, waving his hands dramatically, "he's out here pretending to be some kind of hero. But you know what he is? A Hollywood bully who doesn't understand real Americans." The audience erupted into chants of USA, USA. But behind the scenes, his advisors knew something had shifted. Denzel wasn't a politician. He was loved, respected, and untouchable by the usual political mud. Every attack Trump launched only made Denzel's message spread faster. Cable news ran split-screen debates. Trump's rally on one side, Denzel's interview on the other. Analysts called it the clash of charisma, one fueled by outrage, the other by conviction. And somewhere in Los Angeles, Denzel watched the rally replay on mute. His expression was unreadable. He turned to his wife and said quietly, "He thinks this is about me. He doesn't see it's already about us." The camera flashes, the headlines, the rage, everything was building towards something bigger, something unstoppable. The world had seen clashes before, political, cultural, personal. But this was different. When Denzel Washington announced he would make a live public address at the People's Forum in Washington, D.C., the internet exploded. Hashtag Denzel versus Trump trended for 48 straight hours. News anchors speculated endlessly. Would he double down, apologize, or ignite the fire again? The stage was set at the National Mall, a symbolic battlefield of American voices. Crowds stretched for blocks, from students to veterans, from Hollywood actors to factory workers. Helicopters hovered overhead. Every network was live. The podium stood beneath a massive banner that read, "The people still matter." As Denzel took the stage, the crowd roared. He raised a hand, and silence fell instantly, not from command but respect. His voice, when it came, carried the quiet thunder of conviction. "I didn't come here to fight a man," he began. "I came here to remind a nation what it's fighting for." Applause erupted, but Denzel didn't pause. His eyes burned with steady focus. "Donald Trump calls me weak. He calls me fake. But strength isn't about how loud you shout. It's about how long you stand when the noise tries to drown you out." Every word hit like a drumbeat. The air seemed to vibrate with emotion. He went on, building momentum with the cadence of a preacher and the fury of a soldier. When power serves itself, it stops serving people. And when truth is traded for applause, democracy starts to rot from the inside out. Cameras zoomed in as he pointed toward the Capitol dome in the distance. That building doesn't belong to one man. It belongs to every voice that's been silenced, every dream that's been dismissed. And if you ever forget that, you don't deserve to lead this country. The audience erupted into thunderous cheers, chants of "We the People," echoing through the night. Tears ran down faces in the crowd. Even some reporters dropped their composure, caught in the gravity of the moment. Denzel ended with a line that would be replayed for years to come. "You can call me an actor, a dreamer, or a fool, but I'll tell you this. I'd rather speak truth in a storm than whisper comfort in a lie." The camera lingered on his face, calm, unwavering, unafraid. It was the moment America stopped arguing and started listening. The morning after Denzel's speech, the country woke to headlines that felt like history being rewritten in real time. "Washington shakes Washington," the actor who spoke louder than Congress. Cable news replayed his final line on loop. "I'd rather speak truth in a storm than whisper comfort in a lie." But for Donald Trump, it wasn't poetic, it was personal. Inside Mar-a-Lago, witnesses described the atmosphere as radioactive. Trump had stayed up all night watching clips of Denzel's speech, pacing like a man trapped in his own fury. Advisors tried to calm him, but he wasn't listening. He slammed his phone down and shouted, "He thinks he can use my name for fame? I built this movement. He's nothing without me." Within minutes, a new Truth Social post appeared, all caps, dripping with venom. "Denzel Washington is another leftist tool. A fake hero who reads lines, not lives reality. I build America back. He just builds movies." The reaction was immediate. Trump loyalists flooded social media, calling for boycotts of Denzel's films. Conservative pundits branded him Hollywood's preacher of division. But for every angry post, there were 100 voices defending him. Hashtags like hashtag Stand With Denzel and hashtag Truth Over Power swept across the internet. The White House, already struggling with its own internal crises, stayed silent. But sources whispered that aides were worried. Denzel's speech had tapped into something deeper, something neither party could control. At CNN, anchors described it as a cultural earthquake. On Fox, commentators framed it as an attack on conservative America. Meanwhile, late-night shows turned the feud into a spectacle. Trump's rants versus Denzel's calm defiance. Memes flooded TikTok. Clips of Denzel pointing toward the Capitol have been remixed into songs, protest chants, and cinematic edits that made him look almost mythic. And yet, beneath the chaos, something remarkable was happening. People who had never cared about politics were suddenly talking about accountability, truth, and leadership. In churches, diners, and classrooms, Denzel's words echoed like a challenge. Who really runs this country? Power or people? Trump, unable to control the narrative for the first time in years, grew more erratic. He called for an emergency rally to set the record straight. But the more he spoke, the smaller he seemed next to the calm strength of Denzel's message. The contrast was impossible to ignore, and that's when his team realized this wasn't just another celebrity feud. This was the beginning of a cultural reckoning. By the time the sun set over Washington, America was no longer arguing. It was transforming. Denzel Washington's speech had become more than a cultural flashpoint. It had turned into a movement. Across cities, murals appeared with his image and the words "truth over power." Universities hosted open discussions about moral leadership. Even in conservative towns, people began questioning what they'd been told. Meanwhile, Trump's fury grew into desperation. He launched a barrage of posts, rants, and interviews, calling Denzel a Hollywood puppet and accusing him of trying to destroy patriotism. But something was different this time. The echo chamber wasn't echoing back. The crowd sizes at his rallies began to shrink. Cable networks cut away from his speeches earlier and earlier. In contrast, Denzel's message spread like wildfire. Not because he sought power, but because he spoke with something rarer than politics: sincerity. When he was asked in an interview if he had any regrets, he said simply, "If the truth makes you an enemy, then maybe we need more enemies." The host was silent. The quote went viral overnight. Weeks later, the political establishment tried to move on. New scandals, new headlines, but this one wouldn't fade. Historians, journalists, and even Hollywood itself began debating whether Denzel's defiance marked the end of an era, the moment when celebrity, truth, and politics collided so hard that the cracks would never close again. And yet, Denzel never claimed victory. He retreated quietly, returning to his craft, refusing interviews, letting the moment speak for itself. In one of his final statements on a matter, he said, "I didn't start this fight. I just reminded people they still had a voice." Months later, when a documentary crew visited him at his Los Angeles home, they asked if he believed Trump had changed. Denzel smiled faintly and replied, "Power doesn't change people. It shows them for who they've always been." The camera lingered on his face as he looked out toward the skyline. It was quiet, almost peaceful, the calm after a cultural storm that would define a generation. Across America, from coffee shops to Congress, one truth had finally settled in. When lies burn away, only character remains. And in that moment, love him or hate him, Denzel Washington stood as something America had almost forgotten. A man unbought, unbroken, and unafraid. At the end of the day, truth doesn't need a stage, a camera, or applause. It just needs someone brave enough to speak it. I'm Denzel Washington, and this was never about fame. It was about finally being heard. Beat, cinematic pause. If you believe truth still matters, hit that subscribe button, because this story is only the beginning.